We're going to be taking you live now to the press briefing being done by the Minister of Electricity, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. Let's have a listen.
The media for making it possible for us to communicate with the rest of the country in relation to what today is the single biggest investment program of a post-apartheid government. So there's nothing as significant as we are presenting today. It's got major implications in relation to the prospect of growth in our country, the degree to which we are able to achieve universal access, and how we are able to decarbonize the South African economy and ensure that we are able to get people into jobs. So what we're presenting today, although we call it an integrated resource plan, the IRP in short, it's an electricity plan that seeks to address three issues. What are those issues that we are addressing today? Hitherto, when I come to address the country in relation to the performance of the grid, we're resolving a crisis. What is that crisis? Is the inability of the South African energy electricity complex to generate sufficient demand or rather sufficient supply to meet the demands of the South African economy. And as a result of that, we had to subject the country, consumers and industry to bouts and periods of no electricity because we are not producing enough. And as a result of the lights being off, the South African economy has not been able to grow. As they say in economics, so electricity is a structural constraint to the South African economy, and that's why the economy has barely grown. That's why you have these levels of unemployment in the country, and of course the poverty levels in the country. It's as a result of an economy that is not growing, an economy that's not creating jobs. And the one sector of the economy that is complicit in relation to the inability of the economy to grow is electricity. So we have been addressing a crisis since I've been appointed, and in fact this crisis stretches back about 10 years ago. Of course it became much more intense 2023, and that's why we have seen an economy that has contracted, and we have not been able to reach pre-COVID levels from the size of the South African economy. And we have seen the manifestations of this inability to grow is that the Minister of Finance finds it exceptionally difficult to balance the books because the revenue is contracting and the demands on the budget is increasing, and hence other levers to try and ensure that we were able to increase revenue, including fuel levy increases, including VAT increases, and this is as a result of an economy that's not growing, and that economy is influenced by electricity that is not sufficient to allow the economy to grow. So now that we have turned the corner on load shedding, we are addressing the future. So energy now ceases to be a crisis. Energy and electricity is going to be a catalyst for growth, and that's what we are sharing with you. We are now getting to the South African economy to grow with sufficient electricity demand going into the future. So we are projecting until 2042, there has to be a deliberate and well constructed and orchestrated plan on how, one, we don't get back to situations of load shedding, and two, we're able to secure energy security, and three, that energy security and in particular electricity, the conversion of the primary sources of energy to electricity must be such that is affordable and in fact is available to all. So that's what we are doing today. We are looking into the future. The second thing that we are doing today is we are presenting this program, an investment program if you come to think of it. The size of this investment program is 2.2 trillion rands. So if you come to think of it in relative terms, the South African economy is 7 trillion rands. We are presenting 2.2 trillion rands of an investment program. So this constitutes 30% of South Africa's GDP. And on the back of this, what we'll be doing is to see that they were able to industrialize on the back of what we are presenting today, so that we answer the questions that have been posed by the 7th administration in relation to the 3 priorities. One is to get the economy growing and get people into jobs. And you know that we have set ourselves a target of growing the South African economy by 3 percentage point plus by 2030. So that's what we had committed ourselves to. There is no economy that grows if the lights are off. There is no industries that will decide to locate in South Africa if we can't guarantee them electricity that is available, that is of good quality, and that is affordable. And for as long as we had had load shedding, industry did not have the confidence to come into the South African economy and make the necessary investments. Even those that had invested in the South African economy, we have seen capacity utilization going down. That is the degree to which they are able to maximize production from their installed capacity has gone down because we were not guaranteeing them sufficient electricity. And as a result of that, they had to resort to laying off people, and that's why you have the unemployment rate that we are having now. So we are presenting to you not just an electricity program, but in fact we are responding to an economic question. So we are presenting to the country a 2.2 trillion rands investment program, and on the back of this we are going to industrialize and get people into jobs. The third thing that we are doing today is that for the first time since the recorded history of this country, especially on the production side of electricity, for the first time now, we are going to see that the electricity that is generated from cleaner sources of energy is going to be greater than the fossil fuels. So your cleaner sources, I'll show you what those are. They include hydro, nuclear, wind, solar. They are going to surpass coal as a primary source of electricity in the country. So the country electricity and energy complex is pivoting, and from now on, once we implement this program, is going to be cleaner than before. So if you like, it's a pivot from greenhouse gas emissions, and we are going to get cleaner and cleaner. But that does not mean that we are going to abandon our strategic minerals such as coal. And we're going to illustrate how we are resolving that tension of emissions and the fact that we are endowed with coal. And our view is that you don't have a coal problem, you have an emissions problem, and we'll share with you what that is. So what we are presenting to the country today is an integrated resource plan. This is a policy of government, I emphasize. This is not a wish list. This is not a guide. This is a policy of government. This is what is going to drive the electricity agenda in the country for the period that we are going to define. And we are going to ensure that we achieve a number of elements going forward. We're making the point that if you look at the most affluent and industrialized countries in the world, you are going to find that the per capita electricity consumption is higher. What do I mean? That the available electricity and that which is consumed by citizens in those countries is higher, and as a result of that, you can see that they are able to grow their economy. So the point we are making is that if the population grows at the rate at which it's growing, and we are unable to provide for the electricity that will lead that growth, because electricity must be present before the growth gets into place, and the population is growing faster and people are looking for opportunities. For as long as we are unable to increase electricity production and ensuring that electricity reaches whoever that is in the country and is able to support the industrial growth, per capita consumption comes down. That is the rate, the ratio of individuals in the countries relative to what is installed and what they are consuming. When it comes down, it means that the economy is going to suffer. We also know that economics tells us that there's a relationship of the Human Development Index and also the availability of electricity. The greater the per capita income consumption of electricity, the greater the Human Development Index. So what does that mean in short? As an illustration, that a child in a rural village of Ramokgopa If he or she doesn't have access to electricity, connectivity, it means that we are stunting the ability of that child to achieve academically. And therefore, you are introducing new forms of inequality, that those who have the means, those who are affluent, those who are located in the suburbs, those who are located in cities, that is children of a school-going age who are in school, have got a greater chance of succeeding in life compared to those who are in rural villages. You can mention them in any part of the country. So it's important that we are able to resolve that question. And that question is an electricity question. And that's what we are placing before the country, that we want to ensure that each and every household has got access to this electricity, and this electricity is affordable, and we can guarantee it into the future. That's the point that we are making. So electricity has got relationship with human development. Human development has got a relationship with GDP growth. For as long as there is no electricity, for as long as the lights are off, we are going to undermine the country's potential to achieve its ambitions of growth, and ensuring that we are able to attract the necessary investments, and then that the people of this country are able to grow at levels that our potential dictates. So that's what we are resolving now. It's not just about the megawatts. It's much greater than just the megawatts on the grid. We are constructing a story about how we are going to get the South African economy back on its feet. And we know that we are going through an exceptionally difficult period as a result of, amongst others, and chiefly really electricity, what you and I refer to load shedding. So what does the IRP do? What is it that we are seeking to address? So essentially what the IRP does is a living plan. By a living plan, I mean we make these announcements. You'll find that there are technologies that we have not incorporated in this IRP. We have not incorporated them because, amongst others, we don't have a sense of what is the unit cost of providing that electricity, conversion of that energy source into electricity, using that primary source of energy. So science is still resolving some of these questions. A typical example, you will see that we are not accounting for green hydrogen as an energy carrier, because science is still resolving the cost of that, the unit cost of green hydrogen. But the IRP does acknowledge that as a country, we have determined a path of where we want to go in relation to green hydrogen, but we have not incorporated it in the RP because we are still resolving those questions. Once science has helped us to resolve those issues with regards to the unit cost, the kind of investments that are being made, and we are able to bring down the unit cost of hydrogen, we'll incorporate it. Then we'll update the IRP to take into account these new energy carriers or sources of energy that gets to be converted into one form or the other, and they are able to give us electricity. And once we get that in place, then we'll be able to, from time to time, adopt update the IRP, and that's why we are saying it's a living plan. The cabinet has determined what these parameters are, and that's constitute a policy position. And within those parameters, we are able to make the necessary adjustment. I've made the point that primarily, what the IRP seeks to do is to ensure security of electricity supply. So we know that the 1997s and the like, the engineers presented before the leadership at the time to say at the rate at which we are connecting new people onto the grid, the projected growth of the South African economy, we are likely going to run into a scenario where what we are generating is not sufficient to meet what the demand is. And in fact, you might get into a situation where you have to curtail, if you like, people's requirement for electricity. So you are going to have unsaved electricity in the country. Of course, we did very little and decided that the market is going to resolve that question. And of course, now we stand here. We have been experiencing bouts of load shedding, the most intense and sustained in 2023, because we didn't in part take that guidance. And now what we are saying is that the current administration has taken that guidance. We are going to be deliberate and intentional in ensuring that we achieve conditions of energy security, and this country will never again be subjected to load shedding. So that's what the plan seeks to do. And we say that as we do that, it must be able to balance supply and demand whilst optimizing the environmental impact and the total cost of supply. So we have a duty as a country that those energy sources must not have harmful effects on the population in this country, in particular those who are in the immediate vicinity of the footprint of this generating capacity. So it's important that we are able to protect those communities. So in the mix, we take that into account. It's an important part of our obligation, not because we have signed to some agreement, but because we've got a constitutional obligation to protect and enhance the livelihoods, including the health of the people of this country. And that's why that is covered also in the IRP. And then the total cost of supply. So I did say that load shedding had devastating impact on the South African economy. So I'm not talking about the unit cost of the energy source. What is the cost of not having electricity, that cost to the South African economy? That's something that they were answering, and of course in this instance we are looking at what is the cost associated with choosing one energy source over the other in relation to expansion of the grid and all other questions that requires or begs an answer. So that's what we are answering, not necessarily what is the cost, the unit cost of a particular energy source, but what it means to the complex in general. South Africa, as I stand before you, is pursuing a diversified energy mix. We've got nuclear, we've got coal, we've got renewables, we've got hydro, but that complexion is going to change. There's going to be a structural disruption to that complexion of the South African energy mix, and I'll share with you what the IRP has to say about that structural interruption of the energy mix in the country. And of course, what we are doing here is not novel to South Africa. We know that major European powers are going the route that we are taking, or they've gone the route that we are taking. And in the course of doing that, they also answer the question, what is in the best interest of their respective economies? So before you answer the question of what is our obligations and contribution to a global agenda, first we've got a primary responsibility to answer the question, how does this intervention take into account our domestic circumstances? And as an example, our domestic circumstances means that we are coal endowed. So you can't just relinquish coal as your source of base load. But you also accept that the emissions requires attention, and we'll illustrate to you how we are able to resolve what appears to be an inherent tension between the exploitation of coal and also the reduction of emissions. So like I said, we want to achieve a security of electricity supply. We want to talk of load shedding in past tense. We want to ensure that when the President and Cabinet says we want to grow the economy by 3 percentage points, that in fact we've got sufficient supply to support that growth. And that supply must be available now so that growth can follow. The economy doesn't grow and supply comes later, because it's an enabler of that growth. So we're making sure that at every material point we've got sufficient supply. And this supply must be able to absorb the shocks. So if there can be, you remember during bouts of load shedding, we came before the country and said there's a cluster of units failing, and as a result of that, it has reduced our capacity. We don't have enough headroom to accommodate the demand, and for us to address that shortage, we have to initiate load shedding. So this security of supply is such that even if we've got multiple units failures, whether on the Eskom side, on the private sector side, we must still have sufficient electricity for the economy to continue to operate. We don't subject our people to darkness or to load shedding. And then we want to minimize the cost of electricity to the economy. One of the big conversations now is the affordability of electricity. So we can say whatever we want to say about sufficient supply, for as long as that electricity is not available it means that our people don't have access to this electricity. It means that industries will not be competitive, and as they lose the market share, they must put people out of jobs because the operational costs are such that they are not able to sustain them because they are losing market share. So it's important that we are able to minimize the cost of electricity to the economy. And as I said before, we'll come with that plan on how we are going to address that. And the other one is the environmental impact, as I've mentioned before. What is the complexion of the South African energy mix as I stand before you? So the installed capacity in megawatts terms, not necessarily what is available at any given time. In megawatt terms, 58% of the mix is coal. Just reinforcing the point I made earlier on, that indeed, as I stand before you, we have an energy mix in the country. 10% of the mix is rooftop PV, and you know that as part of our energy action plan as announced by the President, one of the 5 outcomes of that is to accelerate rooftop solar solutions. And in fact, you will see that going forward, we also have an ambition of increasing rooftop solar solutions. So because in many instances, others argue that you don't have load shedding because of rooftop solar solution. No, we have always made the point that we need the behind-the-meter intervention. You know, National Treasury even incentivized rooftop solar solutions so that we're seeing it as part of the mix, not as an isolated incident outside the deliberate intentions of government. And then we know that there's solar PV that is grid connected, that constitute another 10%. And this is thanks to the bid window exercise run by our IPPOF office, the public procurement of new generation capacity coming from the private sector. And you will see that the issues around wind, solar, PV, nuclear, or those energy sources are going to be increasing exponentially as we go into the future. 8% of our generation capacity is coming from wind, 4.5 from diesel, and really this is our peakers, and then 4% is on pump storage, and 3% is nuclear. Of course, you will see that these numbers don't add to 100% of the mix. The remainder, which is about 3 percentage points, really, it's a small interventions on hydro there, biomass there. They are too small for us to accommodate this in the comprehensive picture, but we do acknowledge that they play a role. So we have a mix, and I'll share with you that in terms of the plan we are placing before the country that cabinet has adopted, we are going to reconfigure this plan going forward. So what are we introducing between now and 2030? We are going to introduce about 11,270 megawatts of solar PV. So just put this into context. I mean, what Eskom, the installed capacity of Eskom is about 50 gigawatts or 51,000 megawatts. So this is the solar PV between now and 2030. The additionality of solar PV will be approximately 20% of what the Eskom is today. And then we are going to add wind. Between now and 2030, we are going to add wind of 7,340 megawatts. Again, if you put it into context, you are talking about 15% of what is installed by Eskom now will be coming from wind just between now and 2030. And then our gas-to-power program of about 6,000 megawatts. It's a big part of our intervention because we need the base load, but we also need to address what I call the suppressed demand. So we know that we're talking about the gas cliff, us running out of the gas molecule, the molecules by 2030. We need to make an intervention on how we're going to replace the base load that will be taken out in 2030 must be replaced by an equivalent, if you like, energy source that is able to give us base load, and that's the gas of 6,000 megawatts. You know, the IPP office has already gone out on 2,000 megawatts of gas to power. It's an important part of the conversation because this 6,000 megawatts has to come in place by 2030. So it means that if you think of it, the procurement is very tight, given the long lead times of this equipment, given the fact that you need to contract, you need to secure the molecules, and giving, depending on the solutions that we are going to take, the regasification facility, Richards Bay or wherever the location is. and then 3,100 megawatts of storage, and 5,400 megawatts of distributed generation. And then the other point, you will see that we are not making any mention of coal here. We're not making any mention of coal here. I'm talking of new generation capacity and or even extension of life of existing infrastructure. Because the point we're making is that there's a litany of clean technology solutions that are available, clean coal solutions that are available. What the RP says, it instructs Eskom to say that we must go into a clean coal technology demonstration plant, and that we must see the results by 2030. So that having domesticated it to our own conditions here at home, we'll need to have an appreciation of the efficacy of this solution to the South African environment. It could be working in other parts of the world, but of course the parameters get to change when you move from one geography to the other. So what we are saying is that Eskom has to do that demonstration plan, and on the basis of those results, then we'll be able to know what constitutes that mix going into the future. And then we take it beyond 2030. So cumulatively between now and 2039, what is it that we are adding? Now you see there's an appearance of nuclear. Nuclear is a big part of our conversation. Nuclear we're building 5,200 megawatts of new nuclear capacity in this country. I have made the point that the state will not prevaricate. The state will ensure that we are very deliberate, we are transparent in the manner in which we are going to procure this clean energy solution. And nuclear, I want to say to the country, that is a big part of what we'll be doing. Again, we can see that solar PV is going to be a big part of the mix going into the future, and then that's an additional 25,000 megawatts of solar PV. Wind, another 34,000 megawatts of PV. Gas now ramps up to 16,000 megawatts going into the future, 2039, and then storage, 8,500 megawatts, and the distributed generation, it's 16,000 megawatts. So what are we saying in a nutshell? In a nutshell, we are saying the RP 2025 says between now and 2039, we are going to add 105 gigawatts or 105,000 megawatts of new generation capacity. Again, let's put it into context. It means we are going to build Eskom 2.5 times between now and 2039. And that's why we're making the point about the single or the biggest investment program of a post-apartheid era is what we are presenting to the country today, and to ensure that we are able to achieve energy security. And we say that in addition to this 5,200 megawatts, we think that there's an opportunity for another 4,800 megawatts of nuclear. But that will be supported through our nuclear industrialization plan, so that we are able to participate in the entire value chain. You know that we have hemorrhaged the skills, the scientists have left as a result of us not building any new nuclear program. They have left because we have placed the PBMR program at Pelindaba, at Nexa, under care and maintenance, and they are all over the world. So it's important that that industrialization plan also answers the question, where are the skills going to come from, or how are we going to generate the pipeline of skills going into the future? Let me make the point that the biggest risk to us not achieving this IRP lies in two areas. The first one is the skills pipeline. We have not built any major program, infrastructure program in the country. It's isolated. It's just we have done the Soccer 2010 World Cup, and the next biggest interventions we made was Medupi and Kusile, and nothing of significance in between. So it means that the skills that are required to support this program are in short supply, and that's why we'll be engaging with the universities and the TVETs, especially on the engineering and the built environment and the issues of nuclear. The second risk that sits here is that our industry has been decimated. Historically, we have had the big 5 construction companies. I think now we are only left with one. If we are going to ramp up this build program, in addition to other interventions that Minister Chris is making in transport, Minister Tau is making with regards to the SEZ, we are likely not to have a an industry that is positioned to take advantage of these opportunities. And that's why we'll be sitting with industry to see how best they can ramp up their capacity and capability to meet the demands of this program. Of course, the assurance they'll want from us is that we are not going to do start, stop, because they want see-through going into the future for them to make the necessary investments that are going to support this program. And that's why this is a big part of the intervention that we'll be doing. That intervention is not sitting in the IRP. It's in support. It will be an addendum to what is it that we are going to do to ensure that the IRP comes into life. So the issue of skills, the issues of industry is something that is going to receive our attention. And then as we go to the next slide, just to make the point that, of course, there are doubters about our ability to prosecute a nuclear program. We have a history in the country of a nuclear program. We are the only country on the continent that has got 2 active reactors of nuclear to power. We've got the third one that is for multi-purpose research reactor, which is at Pelindaba. The Egyptians are building 4 reactors. It will give them 4,800 megawatts of nuclear powered electricity generated from nuclear. Of course, they are going to surpass us on the nuclear to power. But we've got that history, and of course, we've got an extension of life of Kubek unit number 1. So we are capable of going into this area. And like I said, we have stopped the momentum, halted the momentum of new build, and that's why I spoke about the skills, that's why I spoke about the industry. So we are confident that we are going to get it right. And that's why we say that we need to put in place a nuclear industrialization plan. So it's not just about converting nuclear energy into electricity, it's about what is the benefit to the South African economy. What are the components within the nuclear fuel cycle that we can domesticate or localize? And that's the conversation we're having with the scientists, and of course from a policy point of view, Minister Tawe, and then we'll come out and share with the country what are those components that will be localized. Globally, there's a trend of going nuclear. There's a new realism, just an admission that nuclear is a big part of the mix. We have seen it at COP28, which was held in UAE in December of 2023. Over 20 countries committed to tripling the contribution of nuclear energy by 2050. So we're not alone. And I can tell you the majority of these 20 countries are in the industrialized north. So that I think others, they say we must seek validation from what the industrialized north is doing. And I'm confirming that if that's the way that we measure ourselves, then we're in good company, that these countries are going in that direction. So anyone who denies, who rejects nuclear as a solution is just denialism and just a rejection of what the evidence suggests to us, what science is saying. And this is the route that we are taking. And now we have seen that one of the issues that comes about is, but can it be financed? 14 of the world's top financing institutions have committed that indeed they are going to finance nuclear going into the future. So we're not just restricted to a boutique or a small grouping of finance institutions. It's much bigger than that, and therefore what allows us is a degree to negotiate what is the cost of building that nuclear capacity over a period of time. The SMRs are in, which is the modern technology that underpins nuclear technology. We've got over close to 100 of those that are at different stages of feasibility. Of course, very few of them will go to commercial, into commercialization. But the point we're making is that the world is looking in this direction. And of course, given our history with nuclear is going to become a big part of this. And of course, you know that there's a site that now has been approved for EIA. EIA has received a green light, 4,000 megawatts that we can build tomorrow on that site. Of course, all of these things add up to really make the case that we are ready for this nuclear program going into the future. A big part of this IRP is that it's predicated on an energy availability factor that continues to improve, and in fact it's sustained at levels of about 66 to 68%. So we need to ensure that Eskom is stable. The energy availability factor of Eskom now, in the past month, we've been averaging above 70%. Just to put it into context, when we're at the height of load shedding, we're at about 48%. The team has improved it by over 22 percentage points, and now we're in good space. That's why we can have this conversation with the lights on, not explaining ourselves about load shedding, but looking into the future and how we can avert load shedding and ensure that we achieve energy security. So it's a big part of this conversation. And that's why I always make the point that Eskom is a battery of the South African economy. If the private sector fails in their by transaction, they are going to revert back to the grid. And that's why Eskom must always have this capacity that is available to rescue and sustain the South African economy going into the future. And that the energy availability factor is a big part of it. And then we also admit the point I made earlier on, that we've got our duty to the environment. We have approved the NDC. Minister George will lead the delegation going to Belém in Brazil. We have committed to a range of the NDCs, and we are not deviating from electricity's contribution to the reduction of the greenhouse gas emission. So we are projecting that the emissions of approximately 168 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030, and it will decline further to about 142 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2035. So you can see the trend line is coming down. So that is our commitment. As we achieve energy security, we are able to ensure that we don't have missteps in relation to our commitment to the reduction of emissions. So you can do both. It's not a binary conversation. It's about doing all of the above, including that demonstration plan that Eskom must do, show the result by 2030. If we are in the right place, then we know that we can continue to run this coal-fired power station to give us if you like, the kind of stability that is required, and we are able to maximize on our endowments. I've made the point from an economic point of view that this is a 2.2 trillion investment. This is about 30% of South Africa's GDP. We really need to change the conversation. If we succeed in this, it means that there has to be industries that are built on the back of this direct, and they could be induced employment and industries that will support those that are at the coal face of driving this IRP, and that must result into jobs, and that must lift the South African economy. And that's why what we are sharing with you is that it's not just an electricity program, it's an economic problem, to ensure that the priorities of the 7th administration are met, including that of reducing poverty and the cost of living. Once we get people into jobs, we are addressing poverty. Whilst we are addressing the cost of electricity, is a big part of household consumption and production of industries, then we are addressing the issues of the cost of living. The emissions are also coming down. So this is the point that we are making, that we are moving in the right direction. We are securing the future for posterity. So we don't want to commit the same mistakes as above, as before, and leave our posterity, future generation, to resolve the issue of supply not being sufficient to meet demands and and therefore undermining their ability to grow and meet their own expectation. We have a duty as preceding generation to resolve challenges of future generation, and that's what the IRP does, to ensure that we achieve energy security. So in numbers terms, what does this mean? So you remember I said at the beginning, in megawatt terms, coal was 58%. So once we complete this program by 2039, coal will be 27% of total generation capacity. But in megawatt terms, it will be 40,960. Like I said, I mean, it's a relatively small decline from what is installed. What makes the share of coal lower is because the share of renewables is increasing exponentially. And wind, you remember that I said now as I speak to you, is about 8%. By 2039, wind will be 24% of the mix. I said earlier, as I speak before you, solar PV is 10% of the mix. By 2039, solar PV will be 18% of the mix. I did say gas We don't have any gas to power solution, but by 2039 we'd have built a gas program that is going to be 11% of the mix. And then we had said nuclear is about 2 or 3%. Because of these interventions we are making, nuclear then surges to 5%. And of course there are other smaller ones that I will not mention here. But the point I'm making, the energy mix of the South African economy has pivoted. What comes from greenhouse gas emissions is now going to be halved. So from 58% now is going to 27%, and then the mix is becoming greener and greener. But that does not subtract from us continuing to exploit coal as a part of our solutions. I did say the energy availability factor should be above 60% for us to be able to support the plan, because it makes that assumption. The gas to power, we've made the point, and then we said that for the 6,000, the load factor of gas should be about 50%. And of course, the IPP office has adjusted that. They've out on the market for 2,000 megawatts. We have adjusted it to ensure that the load factor is at 50%. And then I made the point about the demonstration plant. We'll develop the nuclear industrialization plan. We must ensure that there's effective monitoring so that for us to get the real benefits of this, people must be into jobs. We must build industries, and we do that on the back of our renewable energy industrialization master plan, what in short we refer to as SAREM. So it's a deliberate industrialization plan on the back of the IRP. And then one of the things that will come out in public is a consideration of a mega bid window. Part of the problem with the previous bid windows, we start and then there's a hiatus, we are quiet. And then we start again, then we are quiet. Industry is unable to build capacity. There's one firm that was located in Atlantis, the SEZ, they've closed. They were manufacturing some of the components on the wind side. They've closed because we start, stop. So we want a continuous, uninterrupted program to ensure that we are able to build industries on the back of what we are doing. Like I said, as I conclude, we are going to achieve energy security. We shouldn't be talking of load shedding, something of the past. We're talking security, we'll talk affordability, we'll talk access, we'll talk competitiveness of the South African economy. Like I said, it's a 2.2 trillion rand investment in the South African economy, and the trend line from emissions is coming down, and that's the case we are making to the South African population, that indeed we have turned the corner. That now we're talking about growth, we're talking about industrialization, we're talking about new skills, we're talking about resuscitating industries that have collapsed, and this is a program that is going to help us. It's not just the lights being on, it's about building a future for posterity, future generation, so that they are able to inherit a South Africa that is in a better shape from an employment point of view, from an industrialization point of view, and the size of the economy, so that they are able to realize their ambitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the Minister and the team here in front of us are ready to provide any clarity that you may seek. And therefore, the floor is open for questions from members of the media in the room, after which Vanessa and Takalani will take us through the online questions. So by a show of hands, we'll stick to our established protocol where you introduce yourself and the media house you represent. We'll start with Mr. Yelland there, and then Antoinette. Any other hand in the room? The third one is Lindelo. Any other? And then Vanessa, you'll take us through after these three questions. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Yelland from EE Prison Intelligence. Thank you for the media briefing and update today.
My goodness, what an incredibly ambitious program announced there by the Minister of Electricity, stretching over the next 12, 13 years, up until 2039, 14 years in fact. The Minister there announced an undertaking that will rebuild what is the capacity of Eskom 2.5 times over over the next 15 years. In fact, over the next 5 years, that is the medium term between now and 2030. Remember, 2030 really is only 5 years from now. They'll add 11,270 megawatts of solar PV to the grid, 7,340 megawatts of wind generation to the grid, 6,000 megawatts of gas to power conversion generation to the grid, as well as 4,500 megawatts of distributed generation that will be added to the grid. That means potentially brand new coal power stations, as is. That's not being phased out just entirely, but new additions will be added to the grid. And of course, 3,100 megawatts of storage will be added to the grid. That is over the next 5 years, bringing a brand new generation capacity to the state of just over 29,000 megawatts of new generation to the grid over the next 5 years. For context, Eskom's current capacity is hovering at around 51,000 megawatts. A great deal of that has to come off grid and has to be retired, has to be removed by 2030. And so that base load, the minister argues, will be replaced by the 6,000 megawatts of gas to power generation that will be added to the grid. Beyond 2030, they're looking at adding 5,200 megawatts of nuclear, and that requires an entire nuclear industrialization program that the minister had announced there. That international financiers, he says, are standing ready to finance, and that this will be greater than the capacity of Kuberg, which was built in the 1970s and was connected to the grid in South Africa in the 1980s. Kuberg, of course, being one of the most successful nuclear power plants in the country, and of course the only one on the continent that is performing well. Unit 1 of Kuberg's life has been extended, and that changes what the energy mix looks like at the time. Right now, for instance, coal makes up about 58% of the South African energy mix. By the end of 2039, coal will only make up 27% of South Africa's energy mix, because the addition of green energy such as wind storage, hydro, as well as solar PV will collectively make up a great deal of that. At the moment, nuclear accounts for about 2% of South Africa's energy production. By the end of 2030, it will account for 5% of South Africa's energy production. So great level of detail here that we're going to have to make sense of. Of course, the big question is, how is this going to be financed? How is this going to be executed? And of course, the financing is not just about the financing of the electricity programs themselves. The minister there argues that one of the biggest threats to this IRP over the next 15 years is the fact that South Africa just doesn't have the skills base. And so they're going to be having to invest in TVET colleges and universities quite a great deal to produce the amount of artisans, technicians and engineers that are required to make this undertaking happen. But he also argues that South Africa just doesn't have enough civil and electrical works companies that are able to operate at scale. We went from a big five to just one of the big five being operational in South Africa, that the industry just doesn't have the scale and capacity to be able to deliver that, and that poses a big risk. And of course, one can imagine the amount of job creation that will be able to come out of then. So the big question is, how then will industry be supported and be ready to be able to undertake such a large program? Importantly, and maybe just to focus on the now and not just on the future, the minister announces there what seems to be quite good news is that the energy availability factor of Eskom, that is to say, the amount of electricity that's available from the total installed capacity of Eskom, has been over the last 60 days averaging over the last 30 days rather, averaging at above 70%. For the very first time, we've had a consistent averaging of above 70%, which the minister had promised when he was appointed in 2023. Had promised it in 12 months and didn't deliver it in 12 months. But it seems as though they've been able to achieve that feat at the moment in this past month over the last 30 days. And of course, if you take a look at the national average, it is in the high 60s there at around 67, 68% of energy availability factor. And it must be put into context, because in 2023, when South Africa was going through repeated stage 6 and stage 8 load shedding at the time, the energy availability factor was in the mid to late 40s. That is to say, less than half of Eskom's total installed capacity was available for use at the time. They've been able to improve Eskom's energy availability factor since 2023 by more than 22%. The current Eskom executive and governance team there, led by the chairman, Mteto Nyati, and the CEO, Dan Marukane. A lot more detail that I want to get into, and we're going to be speaking to it with Chris Yelland, and we're going to be talking about the new approach to how the bid windows are being done. The minister there seemingly snubbing Gwede Mantashe's approach to how the bid windows were done. You would recall before the 2024 elections, Gwede Mantashe was responsible for the bid windows, and the minister there now currently describes it as having been a stop-start approach, and the staccatic nature of that, with the hiatus in between, as he says, meant that there was no certainty amongst industry players, and many industry players couldn't trust the program. And what he wants to create now in his administration is to have a continuous and uninterrupted bid window period that removes that staccatic nature of it, and of course provides the industry certainty to ensure that industry receives the sort of support it does. We're going to be combing through all of that a little bit later on, like I said, with energy analyst Chris Yelland.